On this Sunday night, the crisis in the Middle East escalates. Israel trades blows with Yemen's Houthi rebels after taking out the head of Hezbollah. Is there hope left for diplomacy as civilians bear the brunt of aggressions? What's next for this Israeli city bordering Lebanon after a year of bombardments?
Today it's quiet, but last week it was terrible here.
Our Jeff Semple visits a community on the front line. Plus, Helene's devastation, the millions of Americans affected by the deadly storm, and the billions of dollars to clean up the damage. And how this curious home captivated a Toronto neighborhood for decades with its peculiar treasures.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The conflict in the Middle East is escalating on a third front tonight, with Israel striking its Houthi enemies in Yemen. This comes on the heels of the assassinations of Hezbollah's top leaders in Lebanon this weekend and against the backdrop of the ongoing battle in Gaza. There are urgent calls for diplomacy, but the bombardment is fueling fears of a full-scale regional war. Redmond Shannon has our top story tonight.
Yemen's Red Sea city of Al Hudaydah. Israel says it targeted the port and power plants in the war-torn country Sunday, following months of attacks by Houthi militants against Israel. This is not a message, it is an action, said the head of Israel's armed forces. Herzi Halevi said he's looking at the axis led by Iran, with Hezbollah as a very central factor. Israel's bombardment of Lebanon against Hezbollah goes on 2 days after it killed the militant group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. Lebanon's government says more than 1,000 people have been killed by Israeli strikes in the past 2 weeks. It's unknown how many were civilians. There is no future for Lebanon as long as there are armed militias here, says this man. This Christian woman said the Shiite Muslim group's leader Nasrallah gave Lebanese people strength. 1 million of the country's residents have had to leave their homes, including many refugees who fled Syria over the past decade. We don't know what will happen to us, says this man. The country's prime minister says he has no choice but to pursue diplomacy, but Israel shows no sign of letting up. And this Iranian government lawmaker said Iran's reaction will come at an appropriate time.
Well, their rhetoric certainly suggests they're going to try to do something. I mean, just coming out of Tehran, but we don't really know. We're watching this very, very closely.
The White House reaffirming its support for Israel with a reminder it is ready to deploy forces in the region on short notice. That despite tensions behind the scenes with the Netanyahu government over Gaza ceasefire talks. Hezbollah and the Houthis had been attacking Israel in solidarity with the people of Gaza, but their next aggression may be more about defending themselves. Carolyn?
Redmond Shannon in London, thank you. Later, we'll speak with an expert on Hezbollah for insights on how the militant group may change without its longtime leader. On the Israeli side of the border with Lebanon, anxiety is also heightened because of the escalating war. The northernmost city of Kiryat Shmona is just a couple of kilometers from Lebanon. For nearly a year now, it has endured bombardments from Hezbollah. Most of the city's residents have fled, but our Jeff Semple spoke with some who remain.
Since Hamas attacked Israel on October the 7th, Hezbollah has fired more than 9,000 rockets at Israeli communities, and no city has been targeted more than this one, Israel's northernmost city of Kiryat Shmona.
Every day booms here in Kiryat Shmona, every day.
This business owner is one of the only still operating in the city. For 40 years, he's made picture frames and now delivers them to customers because they're too afraid to go outside.
Last week, it was terrible here. Many booms.
He says the bombing in recent days is the most intense he's ever seen, and he's happy to see it.
I think it will be better 1 year from today.
The city of Kiryat Shmona sits less than 2 kilometers away from the border with Lebanon. That's it, just over the ridge here behind me. The city has long sat in the shadow of the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah.
This is it.
The first people come from Kiryat Shmona.
The mayor showed us images from the city's first days, including its first rocket attack and first shelter. 50 years ago, they endured what's come to be known as the Kiryat Shmona massacre, explored in this recent documentary. Lebanese gunmen crossed the border and murdered 18 Israeli civilians, including the mayor's grandmother and 3 of his aunts. Despite decades of attacks, the mayor says his city always endured. It had never before been evacuated until after October 7th. Nearly all of the city's 24,000 residents have left. This family has spent the year living in a hotel to the south, waiting until it's safe to return. I miss my bed, I miss my home, this 8-year-old says. Only around 2,000 residents remain in Kiryat Shmona, most essential workers. Streets, businesses, and homes left deserted. We hopped aboard a completely empty city bus. The driver says there are never any passengers anymore.
Empty bus every day?
Yes. The region was even home to Israel's only ice rink, called Canada Centre, which Global News visited back in 2009. It's now closed and too dangerous to access by road. For the past year, the Israeli government hasn't cared about us. They've only cared about fighting Hamas in Gaza, he says. Finally, they are going on offense. Indeed, Israel's attention has now shifted dramatically to Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Israeli Prime Minister says they won't stop fighting until tens of thousands of Israelis forced to flee their homes in the north are finally able to safely return home. Jeff Semple, Global News, Kiryat Shmona.
In Nepal, the death toll continues to rise after days of unrelenting monsoon rain triggered flooding and landslides. At least 148 people are dead and dozens more are missing. Rescue crews are digging through thick mud for survivors, but the hope of finding anyone alive is fading. And one of the most powerful storms to hit the U.S., Hurricane Helene, has now claimed more than 60 lives, devastating Florida's Gulf Coast and carving a path of destruction all the way up to Virginia. In hard-hit North Carolina, Helene, now a post-tropical storm, swept away buildings and turned entire neighborhoods into lakes. And rivers are still rising. Hundreds of roads and highways are cut off, and communication systems are down in some areas. As David Akin reports, millions are without power.
It's bad inside, dude.
From Florida to Virginia, millions in the American Southeast are confronting the scale of their losses.
This has took my whole life. But we will come back. Good Lord goes before us, and we will come back.
They've seen hurricanes before, but none like Helene.
This is a coastal town. It's the cost. This is the devastation that you go through living in a coastal town.
Authorities said Sunday they were still in active search and rescue mode in many areas.
We still have several that are unaccounted for. We have search crews currently. We've probably caught over 100 people at this time in the I-26 Industrial Park area doing searches. There is such large debris piles that it's going to be very tedious.
But nearly 3 million started the day with no power, no cell phone, no internet access.
Power went out, cell phone went out early that morning, and so there's no way to talk to anyone. Some of the neighbors came and knocked on doors, and we sort of communicated with each other pouring in the rain.
Local and state authorities, overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster, have turned to the Army Corps of Engineers to help restore failed water systems. Some of the worst rains hit western North Carolina, the state's mountain region. It was hit with 76 centimeters of rain, forcing the closure of more than 400 roads in that state alone.
There's probably 50 trees blocking my neighbor from coming out. I started helping them yesterday. The neighbors at the other end of the road, we got us out, but the other neighbors are trapped.
Authorities say the bill to repair or replace the destroyed homes, bridges, roads, and other infrastructure will be at least $15 billion and could run as high as $100 billion. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
On the eve of Truth and Reconciliation Day, Ottawa is under fire for how it's operating its Indigenous procurement program. A Global News investigation with researchers from the First Nations University found the federal program is easily exploited by business operators pretending to be Indigenous. As Melissa Ridgen reports, some now see the scandal as an opportunity to help pave that path to reconciliation.
Procurement policies must also eliminate the risk of fraudulent players looking for financial gains to protect First Nations' best interests.
The House of Commons Committee on Government Operations began hearings last Tuesday, probing how the federal government's business directory is filled with companies pretending to be Indigenous, having access to billions in contracts meant to boost the Indigenous economy.
So the minister says that the purpose of this program is to verify Indigenous identity and then spectacularly fails to put systems in place to verify Indigenous identity.
The solution is not to punish those for whom the policy is built, but to strengthen the policy.
Closing loopholes to protect the integrity of the Indigenous procurement program. But many say beyond that, Canadians need to better understand the harm caused by identity frauds.
They use the identity issue as an advancement in their careers. And what it does lead to, in which we take heed, we watch it carefully, it ends up leading into authoritative roles in government, authoritative roles in businesses, authoritative roles in having an impact on the decision of policy, which then impacts us.
While the government tries to crack down, Ghost Warrior Society is a volunteer group working online to expose so-called pretendians and educate Canadians how to spot fakes and avoid giving them work or platforms as speakers for Indigenous people.
When you have somebody that has a really, really tiny, very minimal detailed, biography, cookie cutter, shall we say, that has no real information, that's where you should, say, slow down and say, I think I'd like a little bit more detail. And there's nothing wrong with asking for more detail. In fact, it's encouraged.
For Truth and Reconciliation Day, they're hosting an online workshop for anyone who wants to know more. A challenge Indigenous leaders hopes more Canadians take up.
It's clearly a chase and run game that's happening, and I just hope at the end of the day, this change in this meeting will wake up the eyes of not only us as Indigenous people, wake up the eyes of Canadians.
Reconciling by working together to end the pretendian grift. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
A mysterious death shrouded in uncertainty. Coming up, what happened to this residential school survivor and the calls for an investigation. A community in BC is demanding answers after the sudden death of a local man and residential school survivor. Douglas Eustach's death on June 9th is sparking more concern about how cases involving Indigenous peoples are handled by police. Now there are calls for a thorough investigation into what happened. Neithu Garcha reports, and a warning, this story contains details which may be disturbing.
Doug was my youngest brother.
Daryl Eustach and his family are remembering his beloved younger brother, Douglas Hyacinth Eustach.
Growing up as young kids, we were always together. Fishing. We played in ball tournaments.
He was a residential school survivor who struggled with alcohol addiction and mental health. The day before he died, Eustach was brought to hospital with serious injuries. He was found in this townhouse complex in what this neighbor describes as a pool of blood. Neighbors say no one else was inside, but they reported seeing multiple people leave the unit earlier that morning.
Because his eye was completely black, and his big gash on his head, and his shoulder was screwed up.
10 days after Eustach was found unconscious with what were described as blunt force injuries, Kamloops RCMP announced his death was not considered suspicious.
According to police and forensic experts, he was believed to have fallen down the stairs.
Were you interviewed by police?
No.
Police have come out saying there's no evidence of foul play.
Oh, there was foul play. For sure, there was blood upstairs, there was blood downstairs, and they had a stun baton in there.
Family members believe he may have been targeted because of cash he had on him from a disability check. In a statement, Kamloops RCMP said it conducted a thorough investigation. The BC Coroner Service said its investigation is ongoing.
I was there from 71 to 75.
In a 2021 Global News interview, Eustache opened up about his experience in residential school, encouraging other survivors to seek professional help, the way he had been doing at a local recovery home.
In his addiction, he said he'd go to the office every morning and call up there, see if he had a spot for him.
Family and friends are demanding not only a more thorough investigation, but respect, transparency, and better communication from police, who they say failed to inform family representatives that no foul play was suspected in their relative's death before publicly releasing that finding.
Kind of like they wanted to get it done and over with.
Daryl Eustache says cases involving Indigenous people often receive inadequate attention, and he fears his brother's death may be another example of that tragic trend. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Kamloops, BC.
If you or someone you know needs help, the Indian Residential School Survivors Society has a crisis line open 24 hours a day. It's 1-800-721-0066. Ahead, one of the world's experts on Hezbollah weighs in on how this weekend's assassinations may affect the future of the militant group. Turning back to our top story now, in the assassination of several Hezbollah commanders in Lebanon. For insight on what this means, we're joined by Matthew Levitt, a counterterrorism and intelligence analyst and an expert on Hezbollah. His book, Hezbollah, The Global Footprint of Lebanon's Party of God, describes the reach of Hezbollah, both inside and outside of Lebanon. Matthew, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
7 Hezbollah commanders have been killed in a little over a week. What does this mean for the group and the threat it poses?
Let's be clear. We have a series of cascading events, each more sensational, each would be rejected from a Hollywood script, culminating in the destruction of Hezbollah's operational headquarters and the assassination of its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, who's an extremely unique personality. The bottom line is the Hezbollah that we've known for the past few decades no longer exists. The new person who's leading Hezbollah, Hashem Safieddine, has inherited an organization that is a shadow of its former self in terms of its military capabilities, in terms of its operational cadre, most of which has been killed. And it's a whole new world in the Middle East.
So let's talk about Hassan Nasrallah for a second, the leader of Hezbollah until Friday when he was assassinated by Israeli forces. You call him a unique personality. Can Hezbollah be the same without him at the top?
I don't think it can. And it's not just because he was such a charismatic leader. He was such a unique person who had led Hezbollah for decades. He has a unique relationship with Iran. He was seen by the public as someone who could lead Hezbollah in his fight against Israel. He had credibility. His successors don't.
So it's a huge shakeup for this organization. You mentioned Iran there just a moment ago. How upset is Iran today? Iran backs Hezbollah. And how compelled might Iran be to retaliate?
Iran is extraordinarily upset. It is also very afraid. It's wondering if Israel penetrated Hezbollah communications and had intelligence strong enough to be able to target them, what does it have about Iran? Iran, at the end of the day, has one key red line, and that is it does not want whatever instability is happening in the Middle East to cross over into Iran. And so Iran is now very wary of doing anything directly because it sees what Israel has done to Hezbollah, and it understands that if it strikes Israel directly now, unlike the last time it hit Israel in April, the Israelis will strike back in force. The Houthis in Yemen just fired things at Israel, and the Israelis just hit them back really hard today. I think Iran has gotten the message.
All right. Thank you for this insight, Matthew. That was Matthew Levitt with the Washington Institute for us.
Thank you.
Next, is it trash or treasure? Selling off the fixtures from Toronto's iconic dollhouse. It's a home that feels pulled from the pages of Alice in Wonderland, and it's been a fixture in Toronto's Leslieville neighborhood for more than 30 years. But with new ownership, the dollhouse, as it's affectionately known, is being dismantled. Its knickknacks and ornaments sold off for charity. Shalima Maharaj takes us there.
There you go. It's one of those places that remains etched in a person's mind, no matter how much time has passed.
I remember seeing this many times as a kid, and I always wondered if it was, in fact, supposed to be Macaulay Culkin, which I just realized it has Home Alone on it, so it is supposed to be Macaulay Culkin.
For many years, this semi-detached home in Toronto's East End has been captivating passers-by.
We were always fascinated by it, like what's the story behind it?
For these two, who've been together for 10 years now, the Leslieville dollhouse holds a special place in their hearts. They came here on their first date.
I was like, I have to introduce you to something because he grew up in the West End and is not aware of this at all. So I thought, I feel like I have to show him. It's kind of almost like a test. Like if he responds well, then it's a good sign for the relationship.
Curating this quirky array of baubles was a labor of love, according to the previous owner's son, a way to fill the void following her husband's death.
She wishes she can keep it forever, but her health is not the greatest, and she needs constant care.
You gonna miss it?
I am gonna miss it. It's just something for the kids to look at. I think it helps them also learn about diversity. You know, everyone doesn't have to have a white picket fence and a pink house or whatever. You can have this and still be loved by your neighbors.
We were going for a walk this morning, and our Aunt Lizzie suggested Uncle John suggested we walk past this because this is history, Toronto history.
The previous homeowner lived in this house for decades, collecting all of these items and adorning her home with them. And today, this is not just an opportunity for people from all across the GTA and beyond to come here and say goodbye. It's also a chance for them to give back while taking home a piece of this iconic abode. So as one tradition comes to an end, it's those memories that endure. Shalima Maharaj, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is this view of the mountains from Chilliwack Lake in BC. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Neethu Garcha will be with you tomorrow. Have a great night.